WP-Get Web Dev Tutorials for all user levels. Alright, so today what I want to talk about is mapping Elementor generated global variables to readable variables that we can use in our custom CSS, and we're going to use SCSS to do this, and I'm going to show you the reason why I do that and how much simpler it is once you've got this set up. So for today's tutorial I'm going to be using WP Codebox, and the reason I'm using that is because right within WordPress you can create SCSS code and you can have that automatically render to CSS. So to be very clear, browsers do not understand SCSS. What they do understand is CSS. So when you write your code in SCSS, it has to compile down to readable CSS so that your browser can actually understand it. Now, why SCSS? I did a quick video on that yesterday. It's a much more flexible, powerful way of writing CSS code. It's a hierarchical way of writing code. There's also a bunch of functions and mixins and all sorts of stuff. If you're not familiar with it, go and have a read up. It's also called SAS or SASS. So SCSS is a syntax for SAS, and SAS stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. The creators of SAS looked at CSS and went, this could be a lot better. We could actually make this actually hierarchical. We can add a lot of functionality to it. So what they did is created this SAS library or SAS language in a sense. And I believe in history you used to write code in what they called SAS format, but there was some shortcomings with it. Instead of mucking up the code that they already had and confusing people, they created a new syntax called SCSS, which is where it gets confusing. So when people are referring to SAS, normally these days it's SAS, but you're writing in SCSS syntax. Now, normally you would need to have either a command line utility like Node SAS or a IDE or some software to be able to compile your SAS or SCSS down into CSS. This tool, this WP Codebox, has it built in. So if I click on New Snippet and I'll go SAS or SCSS or wrong way around, test, what's my typing? SCSS test, tell it I want it to be SCSS, type in my SCSS here. As soon as I hit the save button, it automatically compiles it to CSS for me. So it's a brilliant way of doing this. So what I have, I've created a file here in WP Codebox called utilities.scss, and in here is where I'm going to map all of my variables to readable variables. So quickly I'm going to show you what that means. If I go to a Elementor test page here and I go down to, I think I put it, let me just check back there. I think in here I put a comment so I can find it. I'm just going to look for that. Okay, so topography map in here, so you can see that there, which was generated from my WP code box here. And see, I've got this code here. Let's just look at the first one for the text properties. So all I've got is an each, which is going to iterate through some variables, or a map they call it in SCSS, and it's going to iterate through some more properties, and then it's going to output this dash text with the name, the property equals the Elementor Global, topography, variable, and property. Looks confusing, I'll go through this. But that line there is what translates into this. So it's going to iterate through every one of our font types, and it's going to map the Elementor variable name to something more readable. Now when you're looking at this first few, I've mapped global topography primary font family to my local variable, which is text primary font family. Okay, they're semantic whether you do that, because you could just as easily use that variable in your custom CSS code rather than mapping it. Where it gets very usable is you come down past the secondary, text, and accent, which are the default font variables or globals in Elementor, and you start getting to the ones that you add yourself. So I've got one there called extra large bold. Okay, now extra large bold, when Elementor creates a variable for that, a global variable, that's the variable there. So instead of saying topography extra large bold, it says topography 3C6503F. So when you're writing your CSS code, you have to figure out, well, if I want a text medium bold, what's the variable for that? And then you have to remember that. So you can create comments, or you can make a comment block, and you can copy all these into a comment block and then put a note next to them as to what they are. I prefer to map them. I prefer to map that random string to something that makes sense. Then in my CSS, I use this variable rather than trying to figure out what that one is. So that's the reason I do it. So that's the text. I've then got the colors. Same deal. Color primary, secondary, text and accent are pretty obvious because that's what the global Elementor variable is. When you get to your own custom ones, I've got one here called primary variation. The color for that is color 8BCCFF3. Makes no English sense to you. It's very hard to use in your own CSS. This makes sense. If I want my primary variation color, I use primary variation. Now, what I'm going to go, before I go through the code, I'm going to go back to why this is important. So if we look at some actual code, let's look at our actual services CSS here. And I've got a service block, and I'm going to make the border 1 pixel solid, color primary variation. Okay, now that's mapped from this here, color primary variation. So I put in my CSS rule, color primary variation. What that's mapping to is global color 8BCCFF3. So if I don't do the map, I have to then get this variable, and I have to put that in here. All right. Now, when I'm going back and reading through my code, what color is that? Is that secondary? Is that verb? Is that my primary desaturated? Is this my gray? Is it my black? Is it my white? You can't read it. So you have to create a map somewhere up here with some comments and then go, oh yeah, 8BCCFF3. Oh, that's my variation for primary. So if we use this instead, how much more readable is that? So now I can read through my CSS code and I know, that's my primary variation. So let's head over to the actual Elementor editor and show you what I mean. So here's my colors. Here's the standard Elementor colors. These are the custom colors that I've put in here. So I've actually named these the same as I would that I'd use in my CSS, just so it makes sense when I'm looking at it. This is just a label, so it makes no difference. It doesn't matter what I put in here. I could call that, do that uppercase primary space, uppercase variation. It makes no difference. That's just a label. What that translates through to is this here. All right. So it doesn't matter what that name is. From a technical perspective, from a usability perspective, it does. So I'm calling that my primary variation. Now, there it is there. I'm not using that anywhere. I'm using my secondary. Here we go. So I'm using my secondary here. Actually, let's just change. Just show what I mean. I'm going to change the is text color. Let's make that my primary variation, okay? So there's my primary variation there. Now, if I go back to my global site settings, in my color and I change my primary variation there, I can see it changing there in the editor, right? So let's make our primary variation maybe this desaturated color here. All right, so now I've changed that. So I'm going to show you now if I save that, go back to the editor, and I'm going to now I'm going to remove the color from that. I'm going to give it a class name. Give that a class name of test color test color map. All right. So I've got a class called test color map. Right. Over in my code box, I'm just going to do a and I'm just going to make that a test color map. And I'm going to make that color var. Oops, not car. All right, so what do I want? I want my primary color, primary variation. Okay, so there it is there. Now, if I refresh this page, didn't work in the back end. Let's have a look in the front end. Let's have a look at that. Oh, that's right. Elementor. I keep getting confused between bricks and Elementor. So with that, I've got to actually target my H2. Because this is actually adding it to a wrapper. There we go. So now I've got my variation color on my primary. I'm going to put this side by side actually so you can see what I'm doing here. Okay. So in my Elementor page here, I'm going to go back to my primary variation color. Here's my primary variation color, and I'm going to change that to be maybe this blue color here. Update. So it's kind of a bluish color. So this color here is different to what we have in the actual live. And I'm just going to refresh that page and see it's changed in the front end here. So I can still use my Elementor UI to change my colors, but I'm not setting this color here using the Elementor UI. So if I look at that there, I'm not applying any colors with that at all. Where I'm applying my color is with this code box where I've told it to use my color primary variation. So it's going to map that random variable that it's given it. It's going to map that, which is the actual color. So when I change my color, my global color in Elementor, this is what's going to change. This variable here is where the color is going to change. Sorry, the variable name stays the same. The value given to that changes. But what we're doing is we're referring that to by a simpler name. So that's what the mapping is all about. So there's a bit of a waffle to go through that just to explain why we do this. And it really comes down to writing readable code here in your custom CSS. All right. So that's the reason we do that. All right. So heading back to our utilities and looking at how we actually do the map. So you'll see up here, I've got a couple of what they call maps in SAS. So a simple string map is a variable name with a $sign, full colon, and I've just got a comma separated list of strings. So these are the actual font properties that I want to map based on what you can change in the Elementor UI. Okay. Then we've actually got a list of font variables. In this case, it's a map using the brackets, and it's kind of like if you're used to JSON or JavaScript, they use the curly braces for an object. SAS uses this normal bracket for what they call a map, which is property value, or some people might refer to this as an associative array. This is how you do it in SAS. So have a look for that in the SAS documentation. But this is a map, right? And then for my colors, we've got the same thing here. We've got a map, so it's the name, value. So let's have a look at the colors first. So we've got primary maps to primary, all the way through to accent, maps to accent. Then we've got primary variation maps to this random string. Secondary variation to this random string. White, black, few grays, mapping to a random string. So how do we get that random string? The way we get that is looking at the I've lost my front end. That's okay. Let's go back to it. Okay. So if I look at any object on the screen, so right-click inspect or use your inspector there, what we'll find down here is where's my colors? There we go. So we got on the class Elementor Kit 6 in my case, I'm using containers. By default, when you use containers, Elementor puts the class of Element Kit 6 or Elementor Kit 6 on the body, and that's where it sticks all of its rules and variables. So that's what we need to do. Let's look at that. So if I look here, I've got my color variable. So if I select from there down to there, put that into a notepad document. Here's my notepad document here. So if I select those and stick them in there and then come back to my editor and have a look at my global colors, go across there. So we've got a primary, secondary, and accent. They make difference because here's my primary, secondary, text, and accent, right? They're already named, so that doesn't matter. We get to the next one, which is my first primary variation color. And what you'll find is, if we look, actually it's a bit hard to see here, so I'll bring up the value. Our value of that is 8AADB0. So that's our color value for primary variation. So if we have a look at the first one on the list, it's the same variation there. So that is our primary color. Primary variation color is there. The variable for it is there. Right? So what we do is we go through each of these, and the simplest way I found to do this, if we go across and we put these there, and this is why I name them, one of the reasons I name them as the actual CSS variable that I'll use. So go through that. I'm not going to go through each of these now, but this is what you pretty much do. So map your names to the actual variables. And then what we do is we come over to our code box. And we do the opposite. There's our colors there. So primary, secondary, accent, text and accent you can leave the same. Then we go primary variation here. So copy that. I would stick that in there. So that's the name of the color. The variable is this string here. So the 8BCCFF3. Copy that and put that there. So now I know that my primary variation name maps to this random string that Elementor's created for the variable. So we just create a map of those as we go down. So all of these mapped into this map here. So that's for our colors. The fonts, with the fonts, the fonts here, and we go to one of these, we've got our family, size, weight, transform, style, decoration, line height, letter spacing, word spacing. So that basically maps through to the actual properties that get created. So I've just put a list of the properties that we actually want to map. and then done the same thing for mapping here, where let's have a look. Let's go to our fonts. So with the text, we do the same. We look for the fonts. So let's go down here. And in your CSS, we've got Elementor Kit 6. Now there. I'm just going to grab these font variables that they've created. And we're going to paste that into a Notepad document. Okay. And what we'll see is if we look at our global fonts, we've got our standard fonts, then we've got our first custom font, which is extra large bold. So if we copy that and we go to the first variable there, that is our extra large bold. But what we see if we look down this list here, I'm going to zoom in, I can't zoom in on that actually. If we look down the list here, these are all the same variable name because they're then followed with word spacing, letter spacing, etc. Then we get down to this one here, that's actually the next one. So if we go to extra large normal there, so as soon as we change from 3F to 1.4, that's our next one there. So when we map these, we're going to map fonts there. So when we map these, we're going to go, okay, extra large normal. So we go extra large bold, I should say. Copy that, put it into fonts, fonts, fonts. So we copy that, we paste it into there, and we go, okay, what is the variable for that? That's this one here, the 3C6503F, and we paste that into there. Okay, so we basically do the same thing, mapping the name we've given it to the random string that Elementor has given it for the sizes for those variations. So that's pretty much creating our map that we're going to use in our SCSS to map everything across. Once we've got that, we need to then run through basically an each loop and output some actual CSS. So let's have a look how we do that. So the first thing we do is we find the Elementor Kit class that's been put onto our body tag, because this will only relate to whatever your kit number is. We then need to use the SAS each operator, which iterates through a variable. In this case, it's the font vars. So all of these font vars that we've got here that we've just mapped across, so it iterates through all those. It's the name and the variable. So the name would be extra large bold variable 3C65, etc. So these are the two properties we're going to use. So we iterate through each of the fonts that we've created, and then inside that loop we iterate through each of the font properties, which is these properties here. Okay, so we're doing a loop within a loop. So looping through the actual font names that we've given them, and then looping through the properties. And what you don't echo like PHP or console logging there. Basically, you type in here what you want to output as the CSS. So what we want is the dash dash text dash crosshatch curly braces means that you want to interpolate that variable. So in this case, it's going to be the name of the font. Another dash, we're going to interpolate the property. So for this one here, for example, would be extra large bold and font family, then extra large bold font size, extra large bold font weight, etc. When it gets to the last one, it then goes to extra large normal font family, extra large normal font size, etc. So that's what this loop is doing. All right, so that is going to give us our name. So it's the font property. If we look back at our topography map, here it is there, text, primary, font family. down through to the accent, then we get to our first custom font. We've got text, extra large, bold, font family. So the text dash is that bit there. The name is that bit there. And then the property, or the prop dash prop, is this bit here. So it gets the name of the font and the property and just iterates through all those and maps all those across to the Elementor generated equivalents. All right, so that's what this little script does here. So you see the power of SCSS here, where you don't have to create a CSS file and put all of these in and then copy and paste and make sure these all line up and then copy and paste all your variables into here. You basically create a map and then you run an each iteration loop and output the CSS that you actually want. So that's the topography map. We then have another thing we need to be aware of in Elementor. When we create a font here, a custom font, it does have responsive settings. So we can go to the tablet and we can change settings. We can go to the mobile and we can change settings there. Unfortunately, Elementor doesn't create additional variables for that. It sticks them straight into a media query, so we can't map those. So that part you will have to do manually. All right, so for your desktop stuff, for your general sort of things, you can just map them. But if there's anything that you've set responsively here, you need to create your own map for that. So what I've done there is for the media query of 1024 pixels wide, which is your maximum for tablet, it just outputs a dummy override here, okay? And that's just so that it outputs something. And then for the 767, it just says a dummy override there. So what you would do here is in your source, let's say for example your, where are we, let's get the first extra large bold. So if we went the font size for that is a particular size, which is set through your Elementor UI, but I'm going to copy that, and on a mobile I want that to be different. So I'd actually grab this here, open up another notepad, actually let's just clear all that, stick that into a notepad document. I would then go, okay, what do I want to happen with my extra large bold for the font size when we're on mobiles? I want to change that to REM. All right. Oh. Okay, so you have to manually create these overrides. I've output basically a little placeholder to say what it's to be used for, but you have to manually do that bit, unfortunately. The rest of it is all mapped. The responsive settings can't map because of the way Elementor outputs those, so you have to manually do that. That bit is the only bit you have to manually do. So, all right, so that is that. The color map is exactly the same sort of thing. We basically have our color name. So where's our colors? Here. So it's our name value, so our color name, so accent variation. Let's actually go to the primary variation. So primary variation maps to this 8BCCFF3. So down here, it would, on the first iteration, it's going to be color, primary variation, E global color, 8C773, whatever it was. Okay, so if we look at our source here, get down to our color map, there it is there. So it's the primary variation, so color, font name is the Elementor Global Color 8BCCFF3, which relates back to this color here, our primary variation there. So this is the SCSS rules to actually create all of this. All right. So if you add a font or add a color, all you have to do is update the map. So as soon as you update the map and you hit the save button, it will automatically generate all of the CSS that you need, right? So again, I reiterate that 2 reasons I do this. One is for when you're writing CSS, you can use the actual English readable names that you want to use, and they're still linked back to the Elementor UI, so that when you change topography here or you change colors through here, if you change this color here, any of these colors that you change will actually affect these variables here. So you're creating a link between the Elementor UI and these English readable variables that you're going to use in your custom CSS. So that to me makes sense to do that. All right, so that is pretty much how we map from Elementor random generated variable names for globals through to English readable variable names that you can use in your CSS or SCSS. All right, so that's pretty much. WP Codebox makes this so much easier because you can do your SCSS right in your browser, just in the WordPress backend. You don't need to use Node.js or some IDE or some other utility to compile your SCSS into CSS. So I think it's a great way to do it. I love using SCSS. I haven't been really using it for my WordPress stuff for some time because of the fact that you have to compile it and then upload it. There are some JavaScript libraries that do it, but I don't like adding that extra load on the browser. So this is a great way of doing it. So if you like this kind of thing and you want to see more of this, please let me know. Please let me know by subscribing and liking, and let me know that if you want more of this or you want something different. I'm open to ideas of what I can do to help you with your development. So, all right, thank you for listening.